everybody, Kristen McDonald, registered dietitian, back to show you a recipe from a blog called Erin Lives Whole. The name of the recipe is chocolate chickpea brownies, and when I tried these recently, I said I have to share these with the group at Better Health because I know you're going to love them as much as myself and my family did. They are gluten-free, they're vegan, they're dairy-free, they can be made peanut-free. I'm going to make them according to the original recipe today using peanut butter, but I have trialed them with a sunflower seed butter and it works pretty well. I'll say that as chocolatey as these brownies are, with the peanut butter, you do get a peanut butter flavor in them. When you swap sunflower seed butter for peanut butter, you have less of that flavor. This is a little bit more mild in flavor, so they're more chocolate forward, but the texture is a little bit more crumbly. So I'm going to use the peanut butter, and I'm going to recommend the peanut butter if you can eat peanuts, because it gives that more fudgy traditional brownie texture. But I think swapping sunflower seed butter is an option for you as well. So we will start with 1 can of drained and rinsed chickpeas or garbanzo beans. And this is the kind of typical size can you see, around 15 ounces. And I'm going to be consulting the recipe here because it's not my recipe, and so I'm not quite as familiar with it. Yes, 1 15-ounce can of chickpeas, drained and rinsed. And now I'm going to add half a cup of nut butter. I like to use a natural peanut butter where you look at the ingredients on the back and usually it should say just peanuts, maybe a little bit of salt added. So this is one variety I like. A lot of the stores have a store brand option now too. So I've measured this out. Erin, the blogger, says that she has also made this recipe with almond butter, so that's an option as well. I have not trialed it with almond butter. Out of the two, I liked the peanut butter better than the sunflower seed butter. Now there is no sugar, traditional white sugar in this recipe. The sweetener is maple syrup. I do want to remind you that this is a form of sweetener and sugar. So I did trial the recipe by cutting back to 1/3 of a cup instead of a half a cup of maple syrup. And I don't think the final product turned out quite as well. So I think you should stick with the amount of sugar, but again, just eat these in moderation as you would other brownies. As Erin says in her blog, it's a little bit healthy and a little bit indulgent, this recipe, and many of her recipes. So I'm going to measure this half a cup of maple syrup. I'll add it to my food processor, and then I'm going to do the first blending of the ingredients. So you do those first 3. Actually, I think we can add our oil and vanilla, and then we'll kind of blend it up. Erin says that she uses a tablespoon of melted coconut oil in the recipe. I didn't have that on hand, and I did not want to buy it just for 1 tablespoon's worth for the recipe. So I used a very mild oil that I always have in my pantry, canola oil. Or a mild vegetable oil would be fine, and I would say that this substitution did work just fine. If you have coconut oil, go ahead and make it the way the original recipe says. So 1 tablespoon of oil, and then a teaspoon of vanilla. And I would consider these our wet ingredients, like if you were making another baked dish or baked good, brownie, cake, and so we'll blend those wet ingredients and then add our dry ingredients to the mixer. Let me move some of this out of the way so you can see what I'm doing here. And I will say that this recipe, it's thick with that peanut butter, so it really makes my food processor work. So I think I'm going to put it on high, but then I'm also going to do some pulsing to make sure, and scraping of the edges. All right, I'm going to pause it there, scrape down the edges some, and it smells really good. The peanut butter and maple syrup together definitely smell tasty and like a dessert. And you can see it's kind of coming together, but it's still a little chunky from the chickpeas. So I'm gonna just blend it so it's a bit smoother. Scrape and blend one more time. And actually I have a little bit extra of the maple syrup and peanut butter stuck to my measuring cup, so I'm going to make sure that gets in there. And when you use a spatula to scrape in your food processor, just be careful to not catch that blade and eat up the plastic of your spatula. I'll lift this one more time. You can see it's definitely coming together more than the last time I showed you, and it has a real batter consistency. All right, one more whirl here and then we'll add the other ingredients. Okay, so I'm just gonna consult the recipe. So it says, yeah, just blend them well. And once blended, we're going to add the almond flour, cocoa powder, baking soda, baking powder, and salt. So almond flour is simply ground up blanched almonds. I did have this in my pantry from a tart recipe, a gluten-free tart recipe I had made a couple of months back, and it has kept well. It says to just store it in a cool, dry place. So using the almond flour, it makes me think that trying this with almond butter would be a great complement. Almond butter tends to be quite a bit pricier than peanut butter though. So I went with the peanut butter. I always have that in my pantry, and I know that they will turn out good for you that way because they turned out very yummy for me. So 1/4 cup of almond flour. I'll show that to you a little bit if you haven't worked with it before. It's kind of the color of the inside of a skinned almond. All right, so that's in. Now 1/4 cup of the cocoa powder. I love keeping this stuff on hand. I have a very decadent kind of chocolate mug cake recipe that I make with cocoa powder, and also my kids love the treat of making homemade hot cocoa, and there's a recipe right on the back of the Hershey's cocoa. I do that sometimes in the winter and they really enjoy it. And using it in other baking recipes as well. So 1/4 cup of that. It's very rich, so a little bit goes a long way. Now we're gonna add a 1/4 teaspoon each of baking soda, baking powder, and salt. The baking soda and the baking powder are gonna give a little bit of a lift to the final product here. So I kind of am trying to sprinkle my ingredients around the whole food processor, so that helps with getting them evenly dispersed throughout my batter when I do my final whipping here. All right, 1/4 cup now of my baking, or 1/4 teaspoon of my baking powder, and then a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and that's it, other than adding chocolate chips. All right, so this is the part where I felt like my food processor was really getting a workout because the batter gets kind of thick. So I'll start by doing it on high, and then I'm probably going to scrape the edges and pulse it a couple of times. You can hear it there working. Thankfully, I'm not really chopping anything up like I was with the garbanzo beans or the chickpeas in that first stage. I'm just making sure my ingredients are well combined. So again, scraping, making sure I'm not eating up my plastic spatula with the blade of that food processor. It's looking pretty good, but I'm gonna pulse it a couple of times. And it's really thick. And you could try it too, because it doesn't have anything like raw eggs in it. That's one pulse. I'll do one more scrape and one more pulse, and then show you how we get this in the pan for baking. It's a pretty easy recipe. My kids are have certainly been able to help me with measuring and adding ingredients to the food processor, and it's done all in this one bowl, so that minimizes dishes. All right, one more pulse. It smells chocolatey and peanut buttery, a great combination in my opinion. All right, I'm gonna call that done. I'm gonna carefully remove my blade and get any of the batter off of it. And then within the bowl of the food processor, I'm gonna add half a cup of chocolate chips like the recipe calls for. You could certainly leave those out, but I'm not sure why you would. All right. I'm gonna put this over in the sink, and I need something to wipe my fingers on here because they're a little fudgy. Okay, so this is about a cup, so I'm gonna add about half of this package. You can certainly measure them out if you want. She says you can add sprinkle a few more on top before you bake it as well. These don't have to be mixed in perfectly. You just want to make sure that they're kind of evenly distributed throughout your batter. Move all this off to one side so I can show you as I spread it. It's really nice and spreadable into this pan that I greased lightly. I will tell you, I reread the recipe and it said to grease the pan, and I don't think I did that the first time. Definitely go ahead and grease it, but maybe if you forget, don't freak out about it, because I think the amount of fat from the peanut butter helps these come out of the pan just fine. So I'm just kind of mounding this in the middle of this pan here. And I think the recipe says an 8x8 pan or a similar size. This is rectangular, not square, but it works well. And I'm just gonna spread it evenly to all the corners and around the edges. I don't want it to kind of go up the edges too much. I think it's about 1/2 inch or so in thickness as I spread this batter around. They don't rise up too much, but again, that baking soda and baking powder gives a little bit of rise to the batter and the dough. All right, I'm gonna make sure I get all this off my fingers and into the pan. And I will sprinkle a couple of, I've got more in there, I didn't even realize. Sprinkle a couple of chocolate chips on top, because who doesn't like more chocolate? I think if you're making this recipe, you may be a chocoholic like me. So sprinkling a few more. So again, I think something too, that it can be really fun to swap out traditional ingredients in some of these dessert or indulgent recipes, but it doesn't automatically make this the healthiest thing in the world and that you should eat a ton of it. I think you should still eat these brownies in moderation. The beans in the recipe are just a great way to kind of sneak in some extra protein and extra fiber. The peanut butter in here has great protein and healthy fats. So there are some ingredients that give you more nutrition than a boxed brownie mix may give you. But certainly continue to eat these in moderation and don't eat the whole pan in one sitting, even though you may want to, because they were very tasty. So I'm gonna pop this in the oven. I believe the recipe says for about 20 to 25 minutes, 21 to 23 minutes, a 350-degree oven. And then I'll show you what the final product looks like. So in they go to my preheated oven. And these were what is left of some brownies I made the other day. These are actually the ones that were made with the sunflower seeds. So you can see sunflower seed butter. You can see that they hold their shape. I will say they are just a little bit crumblier than the peanut butter version, but they're equally delicious. So when I bite in, the first thing I taste is chocolate. They are fudgy, they are dense, they are really reminiscent of a traditional brownie. So I encourage you to try this if you're interested in doing something new with your dessert. Thanks, take care.